Well, thank you. Good to see all of you. Several people have called me or text me and told me that they will be traveling, and so they'll watch it on YouTube. Excuse me, on our channel. But it's good to see you all here today. We're going to be jumping into this important subject, and that is the subject, of course, when is the end of times and when will Jesus return? Um, as we look forward to doing this study, Ricky was planning on and is still planning on teaching Matthew chapter 13, which is about when the end of time will come and when he will return. Uh, and he's going to deal with that as he usually does, just verse by verse. And he's also going to give time for you to ask questions and give some viewpoints. So we'll look forward to that. But before we start that, he and I have been talking about it, and he asked me to give a brief introduction. Well, I've been studying this subject for many years, and I've kind of taken the approach of saying, let me look at all the things that I've been studying and teaching over the years and see if I can condense it down into about 15 or 20 minutes. And then when Ricky called me um, and we talked yesterday, he said, I think maybe you ought to take a little more time. This is too big of a subject. I said, well, I'll try and stretch it out a little bit to give a little more information. Well, this morning, since I'm going to take the whole time, I've decided I'll spend a little more time getting you involved and letting you ask some questions. Of course, as we do that, we got to be careful on a subject this big and this popular that somebody doesn't grandstand so that everybody can have a little part. So please keep your insights and your discussion down to a minimum, but be sure to voice your thoughts and your insights anytime you'd like to. I thought I'd begin by just telling you a little story. When I was a younger man, I taught swimming. And after teaching it a while, I discovered that, it's very important before you let people get in the water and get into deep, that they go through some preparation. You know, some people believe you just throw somebody in the water and let them fight it out and swim at their own risk. That's not a good idea. Some children are not strong enough and they just drown. Uh, some children, they just will quit and never learn to swim. I think that's true of any serious subject. Any serious subject, we need some preparation if we can get it. Some preparation about serious subjects. And you take a subject like the end of time or the second coming of Jesus, I think we would do better. It would be safer, and we get a lot more out of what we read and what we hear if we have a little preparation. So I thought this morning I would give us a little preparation for the study of Matthew 13, where Jesus talks about the end of time. I know this, that I was all confused about the second coming and the end of time when I first started studying it many years ago. I wish I'd had some guidelines because, if you just jump right into this subject, like some of you maybe have had to do, if you just jump right into it and you only have one voice telling you, and maybe that voice is right and maybe that voice is not right, you start to form opinions, you start to interpret the scripture a certain way, and you make decisions about it, and they can be very dangerous. So I think this morning, what my goal is that I would tell you some of the things I think that would help prepare you, even if you studied this for a long time, that it would prepare you for a more, I think, healthy kind of interpretation of all of this biblical information. In fact, I'd like to start this morning by just asking a question. I wrote it down so I could word it right. How many of you have read a book or studied the book of Revelation, or maybe been in a small group study, maybe in a Bible study group, or some way you have looked into or studied a little bit about the end of time, the second coming of Jesus, and those kind of things. I mean, just everybody raise your hands who done that at some time. Looks like most everybody. So most of you have either studied it or you have some interest in it. Um, let me say this. I don't claim this morning to have the final word on this at all. I've been studying it for, I guess, 50 years now. And as some of you know, I used to be a teacher at the seminary. I did my master's degree in theology. I did a master's degree in biblical theology. I've got a degree, a doctor's degree in theology and one in philosophy. And, you know, every one of those courses of study included something about what we theologians call eschatology, a word that simply means, you know, in English, it simply means to study last things. So I've had a little bit of introduction into this whole subject for a long time. And you might even say, if you know, if you look up in the dictionary, what's the word scholar? It's the one who's had a higher education. I think really we in English think of a scholar as somebody who has had extensive education in a subject. Well, I would be called a scholar, but you know what? I don't feel like a scholar. In fact, I don't know why I want to be called a scholar. You remember what Jesus said? Jesus didn't like those religious scholars very much. He didn't have much respect for them. In fact, I remember reading somewhere he said, we're going to see in Mark chapter 13, he said, beware, be careful of religious scholars. They're liars, deceivers. Well, I don't think I want to be one of those folks. So all I'm trying to say is I've had a lot of education, but I found out that after studying all these different people who try to interpret these scriptures, it's amazing how they are so different. I mean, when you study about the end of time and the second coming of Jesus, if you want to have a Duke's mixture, you're going to get it. I mean, all of these scholars disagree in certain camps. So the point of it is, what I'm telling you this morning is sort of my summary ideas after hearing what all these different people say, and all of them are pretty learned people. And then also, I want to say that not only this is just my idea, I'm not going to be critical or look down on you if you have a view that's different from mine. I think this subject is so intensely difficult for us. I think that I can share what I think is the most helpful information, but it just may be that your view is altogether right. So just be careful, as Jesus said, be careful of how you interpret these scriptures. So I want to talk about this morning I tried to organize it so you might get the gist of it and maybe remember some of it as you look through this subject. I want to talk about what I call some elements that are needed to prepare to study the end of time and Jesus coming. What are some of these elements that will be helpful to you? And I think that's when we start studying Matthew chapter 13, as Ricky leads us, I think if you'll keep these elements of helpful hints in mind, it might help you get a better interpretation, one that you're more comfortable with. So what are these elements? Well, the first one is, I think we need to look at why is it so important to study this. I mean, this is not just a casual subject. This is a very important subject. And let me tell you some reasons why it's important. First of all, because it has significant Bible attention. I mean, this subject is not just in Matthew 13, as you well know. The subject of the end of time, the coming of Jesus, has some scholars say it has 1,845 biblical references to it. Now, when you think about it, to have nearly 2,000 references to the end of time in the Bible, that's a pretty important subject. But also because of the fact that it has some 17 Old Testament books, some 23 of the 27, some 27 books in the New Testament who talk about the end of time. So the subject has a lot of biblical attention. Secondly, it's important for you and me to get some knowledge about this is because of the widespread popularity. Now, you may not run into circles that talk about this, but it is extremely popular throughout our country and throughout the world. It's popular in that there have been millions upon millions of books written about this. And there have been movies made in small groups and millions of sermons preached about it. So the subject is pretty widespread. Let me give you a little idea. Now, some of you may not be aware of how popular this is in writing of books. You know, if you write a book today, I don't care who you are, if you write a book today and it sells somewhere in the hundreds, that means you're doing a good job. A lot of books that are written do not even sell 100 copies over time. But if you were to write a book and it sold, you know, say into thousands, that would mean you have a really good book. I mean, the publisher would really be excited. But if you sold in the hundreds of thousands, I mean, you are highly excited. It's very rare that you would sell in the hundreds of thousands. In fact, I'd say you'd be in the top 10 books of all the books written in the whole country. Now, if you sold 1,000,000, I mean, you are a great author. You're a bestseller. Then there are not many million. I mean, it's probably down in the like 2% of all the books written. But guess what? If you sold multiple millions, I mean, you are just an absolute rock star. Very few sell multiple millions. Now, let me put that in perspective. One of the most popular presidents of all times was this fella called Barack Obama. And some of you know he wrote a book, of course, like they all do, whenever he retired. And Barack Obama's book, his most popular book, so guess what? 7 million copies. That's a pretty popular thing. But you know what? It pales in comparison to the books written on the second coming. Did you know that Jerry Jenkins wrote a book that you may have heard of? It's called, does anybody remember?
Left Behind.
Left Behind.
Okay.
The book Left Behind didn't sell 7 million copies. It sold 70 million copies and still selling them. That's 10 times more than Barack Obama. Left Behind. And also it's been made into movies, it's made into audios, it's made into all kind of technological ways now that you just can't even imagine. So think about the popularity of this. By the way, some of you heard of the book I used to read, which was called Late Great Planet Earth. It sold 40 million copies. And I could go on with others. Do you see what I'm saying? The popularity of this subject is so staggering that it's worth our attention. It's important. I wonder if some of you could take a guess, why do you suppose this subject of the second coming and the end of time, why do you think it is so popular? Who would take a guess? I mean, just out of your own mind.
Well, for one thing, Bill, this is Ginger. I think people want to be sure they're ready.
Good. Yeah, I think that's very important. What's another reason people get so interested in this? Come on, some of you have ideas.
I think people want to know, not just about that, but about a lot of things. What's about to happen or what is going to happen. They don't like surprises so much.
All right, people don't like surprises. And why is that? Why are they don't want to be surprised by the end of time?
They want to feel like they're ready.
That's right. Maybe they not only don't, but they don't feel like they're ready. Maybe they're scared to death. And that's one subject. It's kind of like if somebody found out all of a sudden that coffee is not only not good for you, it's going to kill you. Well, people would get real interested all of a sudden, wouldn't they? Anybody else? You know, people do strange things about this end of time. I mean, strange to me. I won't go into all the things right now, but why in the world they do that? Why do people get so fired up about this? And I mean, some get, from my perspective, get quite radical. Do you have any guess?
They're afraid.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this subject is so widespread in the Bible and even in Jesus' teachings, he mentions it several times. I mean, a number of times. Let me ask you, do you have any interest in this subject? And why do you have an interest? Anybody willing to risk it? Phyllis?
I think one of the basic questions that every human deals with is what's going to happen to me when I die? So we each have a personal eschatology because Jesus is going to come for us individually one day, those of us who know him. And as Ginger said, we don't want to get ready. We want to be ready. So I think there's that basic elemental question of what's going to happen to me, because God created us in a way that we think about this. We cannot imagine not existing. We cannot imagine not existing. Ponder that for a while before you take your nap this afternoon.
All right. Anybody else?
Bill, Cheryl had something.
Susan wanted to say something.
Oh, okay.
No, I just think it's a matter of people want control of things and they don't.
I'm sorry. Could you speak up a little bit?
Control of things. They want control of their life. They almost want control of their destiny. They want to control everything. And a lot of people like that want that control instead of giving it over to God and Jesus. It's like, no, I can do this.
All right. Thank you for that.
Bill, Larry, it's such a mystery. It's vague as to, the Bible is very vague as to the details, and it's controversial. But I think the reason we see more and more books written about it is because they're looking for that explanation of this mystery of what's it going to be really like.
That's good. Thank you. That was excellent. I feel strongly about that. There is a basic curiosity in there, and we love to deal with mystery. I mean, one of the top ways of writing books or making movies is to have a mystery. People are trying to figure it out. God has given us that ability of curiosity. Anybody else?
Yeah, Bill, this is Roger. I think that the appeal of literature like this goes well beyond the traditional religious group. There's a lot of people who they're not bothered about religion, probably for a lot of good reasons. And it's easy to confront and disagree with doctrines. But when it comes down to your last day, whether you've ever been inside of a church, it's an issue that's much broader than any religion. I think of that country western song that says, I know there ain't no heaven, but I hope there ain't no hell. And this is much broader. And so when you have a very broad base of people who are interested, you're going to have a lot of sales of books about that.
There you go. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Anybody else? I see Phyllis got something on her mind again.
Yeah, it goes back to the Garden of Eden, folks. They wanted knowledge. They wanted to be godlike. And when Jesus tells us, you're not going to know, not even the angels in heaven know, what does that do? That motivates us to want to know.
Good. That's good. Anybody else?
This is Cheryl. I think for me, sometimes my personal interest is God's creation and then everything that came on earth that's confusing and destructive and hard, to know that in the end, God is going to bring it to fruition in his story. Because I know sometimes living here on earth, it's scary. It's kind of confusing about why bad things happen, and to think about his creation and then the end, it makes more, in my wee brain, more sense.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know we got some other ideas, and these are all good. Thank you for them, because it just stimulates our mind. Each one of us, we get a little taste of each one of these things. You might add to that list. I think that a lot of psychologists, as well as theologians, feel like there's a whole lot of people, because of their lack of their relationship to Jesus, a lot of people are very insecure, not just about living and dying. They're just insecure about everything. And when you look at the 5 motivations, or five most important things that you feel you want, the number one everyone says is a sense of security, of being safe. Well, this one raises that. The next one is feeling loved and cherished and having purpose and so forth. This one reeks for people who don't feel secure, people who don't feel loved by God, people who don't have any direction they're going. This thing just reeks of saying, boy, this fills their desire. So I think the insecure person is easily swept up in trying to get some details about how they can stay safe. And another thing is, and this is an ugly one, but it's true. A lot of people get interested in this subject because of the charismatic personalities that draw them into it. One of the biggest money makers in religion is people, leaders, who use this subject to get people to put money into it, and to go off and to form clubs and to form cults and all that. There's a lot of small and large cults that center around the end of time. You remember Jim Jones, who took a group of people down into the Central America, and he ended up poisoning them all, thousands of them, because they were followers of him, because he had insight, he said, from God about the end of time. People really get involved in this because of their insecurity, and because some manipulator takes advantage of them and works on that insecurity. So insecure people are especially interested in the end of time and the coming of Jesus. So anyway, I think we can see the importance of this subject. I'd like to say one other thing. I think it's important because we can get swept up into some of the dangers of it. I think this is probably, in theology, this is probably one of the top 5 most dangerous subjects for Christians, because it can be misunderstood. People can take advantage of us with these subjects. I won't spend much time, but I do want to just tell you, it can cause people to their families to get divided. I know in my pastorate over the years, I've seen families actually divide and separate because of their different beliefs about the end of time. I wish I could take time to give you examples. I've seen friends who got to study this, and the friendship was broken. They wouldn't even talk because they had different views about this and such emotional views. Do you know, I was in a time when I was a professor at seminary, I was invited to churches to talk to them because the churches were splitting. They voted, some voted one way and some voted another way because of their beliefs in the when the end of time was coming. And these churches would actually split and want to go start another church. The point is that this is a very dangerous subject for some Christians, and we need to know how to handle these harmful potential effects. Do you know that over the years, for example, some of the most well-known religious figures in history have actually taught that they knew when the second coming was, when the end of time would be. Martin Luther, back in 1500, he taught that he felt like the end of time was coming, Jesus was coming during his lifetime. And Charles Wesley, some of you may know that his brother John Wesley, a famous organizer and hymn writer and all that, John Wesley actually said this, and he preached it. I can prove that Jesus will come back in 1793. He had it all figured out by looking at the Bible and interpreting it the way he did. Charles never said, I know and I can prove. Charles, I think, kind of went along with John, but Charles Wesley was a very strong advocate of us getting ready, as you know. It was one of his themes in all of his itinerant preaching. William Miller, though, in 18 predicted that Jesus was coming in 1846, and he actually got hundreds of thousands of people to go out on the hillside and wait for a week to see Jesus coming in the sky. And it's called the Great Disappointment. More recently, Paul Crouch, who has been the founder and president of the Trinity Broadcasting Network, he predicted that the end of time would be in June the 9th. These fellows, almost all of them, have a specific date. June the 9th, 1994. Of course, there was a book written just before that called 1994 that predicted that Jesus would come on that day. And by the way, that book sold millions of copies too. All I'm saying is we need to realize that there are some dangerous consequences potentially. And then I also want to say on the positive side, there is also some tremendous value in studying this because it does remind us of the importance of being ready, of taking this seriously, of not just blowing it off. You know, one of the things it says you believe in the Bible. The people who don't give this much attention are people who just don't believe the Bible is telling the truth. They believe the Bible is corrupt. They believe the Bible is just a nice book, and you cafeteria pick all that you want and just leave the rest. And that's one of the subjects that people usually leave. Now, the second thing we need to do to be ready is to understand the situation that specifically got Jesus to address this subject, because we're getting ready to see what Jesus had to say. Let me describe the situation very briefly. If you remember, Jesus was nearing the end of his life. He was on his way to the cross. In fact, he was in Jerusalem, and he and the disciples were on the Mount of Olives. And those of you who've been to Israel, like Phyllis and I have, if you sit on the Mount of Olives, you can look across the Kidron Valley, and you know what you see? You see the temple. And the temple was, at that time, the temple was magnificent. Well, Jesus was sitting there with the disciples, and he was getting ready to help them know more about his death and his being raised again. And one of the disciples said to him, Boy, isn't that temple magnificent? And Jesus took that opportunity to say to them, that temple will be destroyed and every stone will be turned over. It is going to be a total destruction. And they all looked at each other and thought, what in the world is he talking about? How could you destroy the temple? It's so magnificent, so huge. And Jesus said, but the good news, on the third day, it will come back together. They didn't know what in the world he was talking about. But when Jesus said the whole thing will be torn down, the disciples then just followed him. And they said this, listen, this will be in chapter 13 when you start studying the verses. He said that they said this, tell us, Lord, when is this going to happen? What will be the signs? Well, that's what started it all. They want to know when, and they want to know what are the signs that we should look for that will know that the end of time is coming. Let's do remember, first of all, when you start interpreting chapter 13 and you hear all these things, you need to remember the urgency of the time that Jesus is speaking. Jesus is talking about very clearly now that we look back. He was probably, in my opinion, he was talking about his own destruction, his own death. And he was talking about the fact that they needed to get ready in a hurry. They needed to stand ready. He even told a story later on, you'll remember, about be ready as a thief in the night is coming. You don't know when it's going to happen. I'll say later. So remember this when you get Jesus' answer. Whenever you say, why did Jesus respond the way he did, and how did he respond? Well, here's the big question. And I'm not asking you to voice it in front of all these people. I'm asking you to think about it. Jesus is up there on the Mount of Olives. He's looking at the temple. He's talking about the fact that he's going to die and be raised again. And then you got to ask yourself this question. Is he talking literally? Is he talking chronologically? Is he talking historically? Is he dead wrong? Or is he talking symbolically? And if he is talking symbolically, what are the symbols? What does he mean? That's the question, isn't it? Because how you answer that is critical. Some people, and I've been a part of these, I've spoken to these groups before, who say, well, if you can't take it literally, then the whole Bible is completely symbolic, and we don't know what in the world the Bible's talking about. But others would say, no, he's talking symbolically. He's giving messages that have, like his parables. His parables don't mean he's a door. They don't mean he's a vine. They're symbols. Well, you got to make those decisions. Many scholars, biblical scholars, that I have read who are sincere, who are smart people, but what they taught, in my opinion, is not good. It's not accurate. It's not credible. We need to trust Jesus and his Holy Spirit to speak to us. I don't know the answer to those questions. I can just tell you that it's very difficult unless we stop trying to say, I know what Jesus said. I know exactly what he meant. Unless what can really help us if we can say, here's what I think after all my study and my careful examination, here's what I think he was the most important thing. At least I know this. At least I sense this is the message that's consistent, that is repeated. What is the message he's trying to get? What was he trying to get across to these disciples? Was he trying to tell these disciples? For instance, if you remember, he said this when they said the very thing Jesus said right after they asked the question, well, Lord, when is this going to happen? What'll be the signs? You remember what Jesus said? He said, when people are lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Jesus actually said those things to answer their question. Apparently, Jesus was saying, look around you right now. And he was saying, this is all going on right now. Every one of these things is going on right now. And so he then said, so you better get ready. All the signs are here. All the signs that Jesus, that the end of time could be right now, tomorrow, and you better get ready. That's what he said. But wait a minute. Here we are 2,000 years later. Well, look around you. Let me ask you something. When you look around you, are people loving themselves? Are people lovers of money? Are people proud and arrogant, heartless, out of control, brutal, and so forth? Yeah. Well, see, all these other scholars like Martin Luther and all these other scholars, they said that's happening in our time. In fact, I want to just mention this last thing about the people trying to figure out what Jesus is saying. When you go to seminary, one of the things they do is they teach you about eschatology. Well, of course, they have to give you a quick, because there's too much to teach, but they give you a quick run through of what people have said over the years. And when you study eschatology in seminary to get you ready, you know, there are two reasons they do that, not only to help you study, but also to help you get ready for all the dangerous stuff you're going to face in the church. You're going to find people who are going to be mad as a hornet if you don't believe like I do. So they teach you about eschatology so you can just deal with all the people. I'm telling you, when you start doing this, it's not only going to affect you, but affect the people around you. So guess what? There are some primary groups of people who try to interpret this, and they're all divided around this idea of the millennium. See, in the Bible, in Revelation 20, there is a discussion of 1,000 years. So it's called a millennium. During the millennium, the Revelation says, which is a book full of symbols, the Revelation says that there will be 1,000 years when Jesus comes, where people who love him, who believe in him, will be with him. And it will be 1,000 years of peace on the earth. And then it says the rapture will come, meaning then all the good guys will go to heaven and all the rest will be left here. So there's this new earth for a while, some say, 1,000 years of it. And then there'll be the new heaven in heaven. Well, this millennium, some say, well, it's going to come for about 1,000 years and then the end of time. Then some say all different interpret. So the millennium is a time when the 1,000 years, when the rapture, when the coming of Jesus, all of that is what's debated to figure out the order so we can get ready. And all these debate. So there are people, there are groups, in fact, there are seminaries. The entire theology of the seminary is they're premillennialists, meaning they expect Jesus' second coming to be before the millennium, before there's 1,000 years, and then the end comes. Then there's the postmillennialists, who are people that believe Jesus' coming is going to be after the millennium. And then there are amillennialists who don't believe there's going to be any 1,000 years at all. That's just a symbol. The word 1,000 was a symbol. Then there are dispensationalists who believe. Then there are post-dispensationalists, all kinds of millennial groups. These groups are sometimes just local individual groups. Do you hear what I'm saying? There are all kinds of ways of trying to interpret it, and you probably fall into one of these. You didn't know you had a label, but there are all kind of groups by labels. Now, what does that say to me? Well, I'll tell you what, after 50 years of looking at this, Phyllis and I decided that we are panmillennialists. That means it's all going to pan out. We don't know. I told Ricky that when we started studying this together, and he said, you know, I'm a panmillennialist too. Well, some people don't like that idea that all of this is symbolic, or that that you can be a panmillennialist. It means you're just giving up. It means you don't believe the Bible. I don't think that's true. All I'm trying to say is that I think it's very important for us as individuals to go back to Jesus, go back to how this started, go back to the question of what was Jesus trying to communicate? What was his purpose? What was his main point when he talked to those disciples, knowing that they were going to see him be crucified and raised again? And I think the main message is simply this. Jesus said, no one knows. You'll see this in Mark chapter 13. Jesus says, his final word, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will come, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. And since you don't know when the time will come, Jesus said, be on your guard, stay alert, be ready. Jesus' main point, he made it very clear. I'm not giving you this stuff so you can figure it out. He said, guess what? Not even the Son can figure it out. He said, not even I can figure it out. Not even the angels. No one can figure it out. Why are you trying to figure it out? And so Jesus is teaching us he's got a different purpose. And when we read chapter 13 in Mark, let me ask you to consider this. Don't try and figure out a date, a time. Just take this thing like Jesus did is, look, you can see, as you look around, you can see all these things that are happening, all these things that both chapter 13 and the rest of the Bible say, they're all happening now. And when you start trying to put a time on it, just remember what the Bible also says. A day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. Let me ask you something. When you think about that the scripture says a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. What do you think that verse is saying? Some of you tell me. What's the point of that?
Well, Mr. Roger, I guess I'd say it's God's time. It's kind of like the Kairos issue of God's time, and that's entirely different than the increments that we place on time and their limited knowledge.
Exactly. Anybody else? What do you think he's saying there? The day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day to God.
I know, Bill, for me, it's Ralph, but now as I've learned a little bit, or trying to learn a little bit more, it's just a reminder that, you know, in Isaiah where it tells us God's ways are not our ways, and our thoughts are not God's thoughts, and otherwise I'm not God. And there is only one God, and only he knows. Get on with your life.
You think Jesus was telling us when he told us that he told the disciples that when the end of time comes, he says all these terrible things will happen. Nations will rise against nations. There'll be famines and earthquakes. The sun will turn dark. Everything will be dark, and then the moon will turn blood red. Then there will be wars and rumors of wars. He said these and other things are going to be happening. Do you think Jesus was telling the disciples that so they could get ready, or they could figure out how much time they had? What do you?
There's gonna be some difficult times ahead.
Anybody else? What was Jesus' point in saying that?
Well, he wanted them to tell the other people so that they would know.
Good. Anybody else? What was Jesus' point?
Susan, I think that when he said that, the things were always gonna be that way on this earth, always. There will always be wars and people being evil and destructive. That was never gonna change. So his point was be ready, because we don't know the time. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a day or 1,000 years or 10 months or whatever, because people are always going to be the way they are. Humans are always sinful, no matter what. And all you can do is ask for God's grace and forgiveness. And just be ready.
That's good.
Yeah, this is Joyce. I just have always felt like the whole purpose is to be ready, period. And that's it.
That's good. I think it's that simple and that good. For me too, Joyce. Anybody else have a thought?
Bill,
Yes.
Matthew 6:34, Jesus tells us, so don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today.
Amen.
One day at a time. You know, I wake up in the morning, dear Lord, thank you for another day. Help my hearing for your voice and my eyesight for your direction. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know what today is going to bring. So, and tomorrow's going to bring exactly what I got today in terms of my environment. So that's kind of one that I like.
That's good, Charlie. That is very good. Anybody else? Well, yes, Phyllis.
I was just thinking that a lot of people kind of tie their thoughts and their studies about eschatology to what's going on in Israel. Israel seems to be kind of central in some of this. And some of them also tie their thoughts and predictions according to what's going on in the heavens, like this, this recent eclipse we had a few months ago when people were getting ready. Jesus was coming that day, which is kind of interesting. But Charlie, that verse and your words remind me of an old gospel song. Do any of you remember that old gospel song? I don't know about tomorrow. Oh, that's a good old gospel song. I don't know about tomorrow, but basically the text says, but I know who holds tomorrow in his hand. And that brings me great peace.
That's right. That's good. Anybody else? Well, let me take these last few moments to simply say this, is that I hope that when you start thinking about this subject, as we look at Matthew 13 a little more closely, I hope you won't feel like you're being thrown in the deep end of the pool. I hope that you feel like you've been prepared a little bit. You kind of know that this is important to know. I think it's going to help you say to you, I hope it helps you say to yourself, I know that some people can really go wild on this stuff and get themselves in a lot of trouble, cause other people to have trouble. I can get myself all wound up on my view and think that I know exactly what's going on. I hope this little introduction, this little preparation thing will help you see that you'll keep in mind where Jesus was when he said this. And then all these other things, John, when he wrote the Revelation, you remember, I actually went to the Isle of Crete where he was in a cave and he was in chains there in a cave, and he was writing the Revelation. And the apostle John could look out from that hole. I looked out from that hole on Crete, and you can look across the water and you can see the mainland and remember where you were. And he had these visions, and he wrote the Revelation about the horrible way that the Romans were treating those people and all the terrible persecution they were having. And he had to figure out, how in the world am I going to write this to them? Because it better be, it better be symbolic, so they can't figure out, the bad guys can't figure out the message I'm giving to the good guys. I hope that you can remember where Jesus was and what he said, the main thing he said about getting ready, and let it interpret for you as the Holy Spirit leads you. Interpret for you what all the other things Paul said and others said. Let them be interpreted in light of what Jesus said and where he was and what was getting ready to happen. And with that introduction, we'll look forward to Ricky picking up on Mark 13. You might want to read over it, maybe in a couple of translations. I think it will be, I hope it will have a different appearance as we start studying. Thank you for today, and look forward to next Sunday. Keep praying for Ricky and Beverly, I ask. And Ralph, I'll turn it over to you now.